Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician coach and an intimate marriage expert, and I am diving into the deep end today. I'm going to be talking about polyamory, open relationships, and all such things. So I have a few caveats to start with. I have previously never talked about polyamory or open relationships or anything of that sort. And I have many reasons for why I've never addressed it. First of all, there are many people in my audience who are just disgusted by the idea. And I didn't check, but I fully expect that once I sent out information about this webinar, that there are a lot of people who unsubscribed. And I'm fine with that. However, I also have great respect for the people who are committed to a two-person intact marriage, a closed marriage, if you will. I have deep respect for that approach. And I also have deep respect for people in polyamorous relationships. And I'm not actually here to change anybody's mind. I don't have an agenda with that. And really, the only reason that I'm addressing this topic is I have received so many questions recently from, actually, I'm trying to think, from all in heteronormative relationships. I've received some questions from men who are married to women who want to open the relationship and have sex with other people. And I've received more messages from women married to men who want to open the relationship. Some of those women are in relationships that are wonderful, with a healthy sex life and good, strong communication. And so this kind of request was very surprising because it seems like the marriage was full, complete, and really much better than most people. Like there were no problems. And then I've heard from others where there are some problems, and this is one of the solutions that they're considering. So again, I want to be very clear. If you are against this topic, no problem. Stop watching. I'm not trying to convince you of anything, and I will continue sharing content and having conversations that will be intended to give you insight, inspiration, confidence, clarity on how to have more pleasure and more passion with your spouse. And if this is a question that you're living with in your marriage, or you're just curious, then I'm glad you're here. Let's go ahead and dive in. Now, from the different people that I've heard from wanting me to address this, I think, well, this doesn't have to be the case, but it is the case of the people who've reached out, that when their spouse brings it up, it's shocking. It's surprising. And very often it feels like a rejection. Like, I'm not good enough, because if I were good enough, if I were a good enough lover, if I were an attentive enough human being, then my partner would not be looking to have erotic experiences with other people. So that's one thing that certainly can be true, but doesn't need to be true. And the other thing I want to say is that what polyamory looks like is as infinite as your imagination permits. So before I go further into that, I want to be really clear. Well, let me say that there are so many different points of view, from don't ever think about it, don't ever do it, to go for it, have fun. And you can find whatever message you want to find, you will be able to fairly easily find someone who's speaking that message. So my intention is to be totally genuine and in integrity with myself, with what I'm going to share. And my hope is that Either it speaks to you and you agree with it, or you don't agree with it. So use what I'm saying to really refine your different opinion and position. That's great. That's a good use of what I'm going to share. If you want to find resources, experts on polyamory who are 25 years old and have never been married, well, great. Those are good teachers for some people. But that is not actually the conversation that I want to be having today. I want to be having this conversation from the position of having, actually, maybe I'll say that. So I've been married 27 years. We have 4 children and a lot of stability. And from the outside, it looks like we have a very conventional marriage. I take my kids to baseball practice and all that sort of thing. And I have participated in training programs and in various ways in communities with, in fact, one of the primary places I trained, most of the people there were young, unmarried, and very boundaryless in their polyamory. And I was already married, going home to make sure my kid had finished their homework. So I've had a great deal of personal exposure as well as professional exposure. My point in saying what I've just said is that I'm having this conversation having coached many couples who were already polyamorous when they came to me. I've also coached many couples where they were considering opening up and chose not to, when they were considering opening up and went ahead with it. And so what I want to say is that I have a great deal of both personal and professional exposure to draw on. When I say personal, I don't actually mean to imply in my own marriage. I don't mean to imply yes. I don't mean to imply no. I just mean not to talk about it. But I mean that I've had personal experience in the way of lots of friends, lots of interactions with people. And so that is what is informing me today. The first point that I really want to land strongly, I think this is often missed, and it's the most important thing. Not if you're a single person experimenting with different things, or you've been dating for a little while, or that sort of thing. But I mean, the two of you are in a strong, stable marriage, or in any case, you're in a marriage that has been established for a long time. You didn't just get married yesterday. You have a life together. And I would say unequivocally, if there are issues in your relationship, if there are places where you are unsatisfied, where you're lonely, where you're frustrated, where you feel rejected, whether they are in the realm of sexuality or in any other part of your relationship, if there is something that is not working for you in your marriage or committed partnership, do not try to compensate or solve that problem by opening up the relationship. In other words, if you have issues in your relationship, opening up the relationship is not the way to solve those issues. It will just postpone them and make it much harder to address them and create a kind of chaos and suffering that is not your intention. If what you actually want to do is end the relationship so you can be with someone else, well, then have integrity with yourself and end the relationship and be with someone else or many other people, whatever you want to do. But if your goal is to find the way forward with your partner, to have more joy and more connection in your life, the way to accomplish that is not to open the relationship. That is a distraction. That is an avoidance. That is operating on the wrong channel. So what I really want to say clearly is, if you want your marriage to be better, then focus on making your marriage better without complicating things. How to do that? Well, you can work with me. The Aligned and Hot Marriage program is an incredible way to address the vitality and quality of connection in your marriage. If what you want is to feel more alive, feel more connected, feel more closeness, then sign up for the Aligned and Hot Marriage program and get yourself some tools and inspiration and fun activities that will help you connect in new and more meaningful and passionate ways. Do not open the relationship in order to accomplish that, because it's literally playing with fire. In fact, I heard recently from a former client of mine, and he and his wife, they both wanted it. They ended up having a threesome without really discussing things with care at a time when their marriage was not really that great. He thought she wanted it, and it turned out it was a trick to find out if he really loved her. If you're wondering if your spouse really loves you, do not open the relationship in order to find out. Okay, I think I've made that point more clearly, and I'm moving on to other things. But, the context for pursuing this really makes all the difference in how it goes. And in fact, there are many reasons not to open the relationship. Reasons given in all kinds of places in terms of society, religious teachings, and the one that I just said. And having said all that, I'm just putting it aside, because the reason that I think people reach out to me has to do with my approach related to uncompromising intimacy. If that's not familiar to you, I want to just summarize how I think about that. Because far and away, the most common relationship advice that is given throughout the Western world, and really probably the whole world, but certainly the Western world, if you want to be happy, the key is to compromise. You need to be good at compromise in order to have a good marriage. And the fact is that that is completely wrong. If what you want is a pleasant, bland companionship, then absolutely compromise will deliver that. But if you want a juicy, incredible, adventurous, dynamic, sexually fulfilling relationship, then uncompromising intimacy is the way to go. It's the name of my book. It's the name of my methodology. It's what informs the Aligned and Hot Marriage program. It's why I recommend it to someone who wants to enliven their marriage. And what that means is not that you always get your own way, but that if you think of compromise as a way in which you hold back on what you desire and what matters to you, so that your partner is comfortable, when it comes to uncompromising intimacy, you share what you want. You learn to bring it so your partner can hear it and invite your partner to do the same. So for someone who is familiar with the principles of uncompromising intimacy and the essential deliciousness that comes with honoring your desires and sharing them with your partner, it makes sense to me that people are reaching out, because what is the partner sharing? That they want to be poly, that they want to open the relationship. And so, true to the method of uncompromising intimacy, I would never summarily say, no way, don't talk to me about that again. Because if that's a desire your partner has and you approach it that way, you are creating barriers. You are creating disconnection by blocking the conversation altogether. So, in the context of uncompromising intimacy and being able to share what you want and share what you desire, my next question is, are you talking about the sex that you're having with one another? Because typically there is so much more to say and explore about the sex you're having with one another. And so again, I wouldn't even consider opening the marriage unless you're able to have really flirtatious, serious, anatomically literal, vulnerable, hopeful, awkward conversations about the sex you're having. You want the channels of communication to be open. And when you know how to have really great conversations with one another about the sex that you're having, well, then having a conversation about sex with someone else is a totally different and much better experience, because at that point, you know that you can discuss things, and having the conversation is not threatening. It's just a conversation. It's not a commitment. It's an exploration. And when you're in a relationship where things are really good and you both feel able to really share needs and desires, you can count on one another, there's the right amount of safety and the right amount of excitement with one another, and you're able to really have frank, meaningful, impactful conversations about the sex you're having with one another, then the conversation about opening up the marriage in a way that has integrity and honors both of you and aligns with the values you already share with one another, then that conversation becomes one that's actually very fascinating and titillating and profound and rich and complicated and very worthwhile if one of you desires to be having it. Because whatever decision you make, that conversation can lead to more closeness through knowing one another better. If you do decide to proceed, I think one of the most important criterion to use is whatever activities you're either doing individually or together with other people, is it adding more energy to your relationship or is it depleting your relationship? And you don't always know that in advance. But once you're both really on board with moving forward, then that, I think, is the most important question. And the answer can vary from time to time. Like you may have a phase where what's happening with other people is adding energy to the relationship. And then you may get into a time where it's actually not, and it's depleting things in a form of avoidance. And then you want to look at it again. I also want to be really clear that if you don't want to blow up your marriage, you want to be really calibrated. So the first part of this journey is just having the conversation. And maybe the next part of the journey is going together to a swingers club with the understanding that neither of you are going to do anything with anybody else. Or maybe you decide to bring someone to a hotel room, the three of you. Like there's so many ways to proceed, and whether you're both involved or just one of you is involved. And if one of you feels like blown out, like it's just too much, then you've lost the connection and you want to dial back the conversation to a small enough chunk where you have connection again. Because the thing that most people talking about polyamory aren't really adequately addressing, in my opinion, is prioritizing the connection between the two of you. And if that is strong, that is nourished, and you're both super attuned to any deviation from it, and you prioritize coming back to connection, well, with that connection really beautifully tended, there's the possibility of all kinds of things you may not have imagined would be part of your marriage, but it doesn't go well when the connection is fractured or deprioritized by one of you or both of you. And I want to reiterate the importance of keeping attention on what adds energy to the relationship and what depletes it. Because sometimes having these conversations and preparing to open the relationship can be really depleting and draining and massive downers in a relationship. And those very same conversations can be really hot and exciting and edgy, such that you find yourself having more sex and having just more sensational sex, like with more heat and more erotic energy. And the turn on is incredible just by having these conversations. So I would pay attention to what's happening between the quality of your connection when you're having these conversations, because it's a helpful indicator about what's going to happen when you actually open things up again. It's why I don't really, prior to today, haven't really said much at all about polyamory, because it's not a tool to improve a relationship. It's a tool to have more pleasure, to expand the relationship. So maybe it could be considered improve in that sense, to make it bigger and more gratifying. There's a whole other terrain that you get to share with one another and experiences you get to have. But it is not a way to improve communication, and it really isn't a way to improve your sex life most of the time. I will add that it does improve connection when all these other criteria are well met that I've been sharing. And there's another thing I want to say, which is that so often people's sexual self is immature compared to who they are in the world, compared to their biological age. Like, let's say I am 54, and it's common for a 54-year-old, for a 38-year-old, that sexuality can largely be frozen at age 12, let's say, or 16, especially now where so many people learn how to have sex through watching porn. You can get into a sexual expression from masturbating at 15, and that is the flavor that you bring to your sexuality. Even as your educational level rises, your financial level rises, your capacity to communicate, to know yourself, your personal growth all rises, that doesn't necessarily mean that your sexual self also grows and ripens and matures. And one of the most amazing places that I've seen polyamory really, really enhance a marriage is when someone's sexual self is immature and they can have experiences that their 15-year-old self wants, and then their 20-year-old self and 25-year-old self, and maybe their 40-year-old spouse doesn't really want to have those experiences or doesn't want to have those kinds of vibes in the bedroom. And in that situation, polyamory is really amazing. Although if that sounds like too risky, then I invite you to role play. If your husband's sexual orientation is that of a 15-year-old, well, bring your sexy, confused, naive, clueless 15-year-old to sex with him. Plan it ahead of time. It doesn't have to be every time. And if you don't want to do that, then maybe actually you can be grateful someone else will. So this is not really meant to be comprehensive, but I really do want to convey how dynamic this topic is. And it's nowhere near as simple as it seems, both the choice to do it and what can happen when you do. As we grow, our sexual selves should be growing as well. I think this is one of the reasons that the statistics around sex after 50 are just horrific. 50% of women age 50 and older, or maybe it's 51 or 52%, I don't remember, but like about 50% of women age 50 and older are not having sex. that is for so many reasons, but one of them is that in our society, we're not oriented to the way that our sexual selves mature. And that's what makes things delicious, and why sex in your 60s and 70s is actually the most gratifying for those who actually walk the path and continue to evolve and play with their sexual energies and sexual selves. So I'm guessing that if you have a partner who wants to be poly and you've come on this webinar, that you come away not sure what I'm recommending. At least I hope that's true, because I'm not recommending anything specific in terms of being poly or not being poly. I think there are good reasons not to, and I think there are good reasons to. But what's most important is that whatever content, whatever conflict, whatever risky energy is in your marriage, that you use that to know yourself better and create more connection. And all of the tools in the Aligned and Hot Marriage program will absolutely help you do that. But don't be confused that having sex with someone else is going to do anything other than you having sex with someone else. The standard of being acceptable, it seems like a minimum standard, but it seems kind of low. So ideally, we want to be able to embrace who our partner is. We want to be able to embrace their magnificence, their desires, their challenges, how they carry their baggage. We want to be able to embrace who they are, not just accept it. I mean, I'm not sure, it's all in the tone of voice, so I'm not sure exactly how you would say that word, but when I say accept, sometimes that's a really rich, warm invitation, and sometimes it sounds a lot like settle, which sounds a lot like compromise. So I don't think this is a realm in which to compromise. I do think it's a realm in which to access more truth and experiment. You don't need to commit to becoming poly. If you're in conversations about opening for the first time, you do not need to commit to that. All you need to commit to is one next step. Maybe you listen to a poly podcast together. Maybe you read some poly erotica out loud. Maybe you meet at a swingers bar, but you don't go together. One of you is at the bar and the other one shows up, and you pretend like you're meeting in that environment. Like, there's so many ways to access more erotic energy. And if being polyamorous is the way you both choose, great. I mean, that's fabulous. But if being polyamorous is the way one of you wants and the other one doesn't, then I invite you both to use more imagination for how you can access what the one of you really is the flavor you want to experience, because we're really talking about feelings in the body and feelings in the soul. And there is so much more creativity than most people are tapping into. And to put it perfectly frankly, it's not just about fucking. That's not the conversation we're talking about. Is it more emotional connection? Is it new kinds of sexual experiences? Like, what is the adventure you want? And what are the creative ways that are going to be safe enough for both of you and adventurous enough for both of you? And those are the questions to be asking. One of the things when you have a marriage, and particularly a sex life, that has become very routine, monotonous, perhaps even boring, well, there are many ways to bring more vitality and erotic juiciness to it through more vulnerable communication, through doing things differently. And one of the ways to bring more vitality to a monotonous sex life is by playing with taboo. And what is taboo can really be arranged. Taboo might be having sex when there's a guest in the house. Taboo might be exploring various kinky things. Taboo might be that that one of you is totally in the surrendered responsive role, and the other one is saying exactly what to do. Taboo might be doing something in your backyard, knowing that there's the possibility neighbors might happen to overhear something. And certainly for so many couples, polyamory has the flavor and juiciness of taboo. So I was mentioning that because if you're looking for creative ways to both feel more alive and more connected, you can start with breaking smaller taboos, like having sex when you have a guest in the house. And maybe that's so delicious and exciting, and you just have the more hots for one another. And maybe that's just the beginning of a very long, meandering journey which ends up planting you permanently in the land of polyamory. Like, it's less about getting attached to some particular thing and more about leaning in and exploring what's gonna feel good, what's gonna, and you don't always know ahead of time, which is why experimentation is necessary. But you can experiment in a boundaried container. And I think that's something that I really want to convey, that if you're thinking of this as either or, you're sort of missing the point. I mean, for some couples, that is clearly appropriate. It's or we do not have an open marriage. There's nothing to discuss and well circumscribed, no problem. But if you are interested, then you discover there's so much range and variety possible at every single level. And it's not either or, either we're poly or we're not. You don't need to get stuck on the labels. And I'm not saying don't get stuck on the labels like some young fluid hippie. No, I'm saying don't get stuck on the labels, because what you're after are feelings and sensations. That's where the erotic energy lies, not in a particular identity. I think one of the places it gets super tricky is when two people in a couple have different identities or different words to describe what they're already doing. Like, it's certainly the case that there are marriages where one person says we're monogamous and the other one says no, we're not. Or even monogamish, like there are plenty of spouses who want their spouse not to ever think about sex with another woman, and doing that is cheating on them. Like, I don't know how often it comes up, but I've certainly had questions like, if my husband uses porn a lot, is he cheating on me? It's like, I'm never going to answer that question, because you can build a whole paradigm in which the answer is yes, and you can build a whole paradigm in which the answer is no. What really matters is what's true and being honest and vulnerable with one another. Polyamorous explorations can really nourish your own relationship. And for me, anything I'm talking about, I'm interested in how to nourish your own relationship. And this is definitely one of the ways. And if your sex life goes through a phase where it's not so good, and you've already been really comfortable including a third person, then maybe that's something you reach for again. But if you've never opened the relationship and your sex life isn't so good, do not reach for a third person as the way to do that. That it's just a reality that I guess my final closing remark, the most important thing is that you both feel aligned with prioritizing the relationship you have with one another. And you both are devoted to feeling cherished and expressing that you cherish your partner. Because in that context, any which way of doing things is possible. Now, I guess I'll also say that I don't mean that you need a perfect relationship in order for polyamory to go well. But I do mean that you need aligned priorities and open communication, which brings me back to saying that if you're thinking about opening your relationship and it's not a smooth process, not that every moment is smooth, but that it's really complicated, I highly recommend that you enroll in the Aligned and Hot Marriage program. You will have tools and contexts and learn how to really speak your truth and be vulnerable with one another. And you're going to feel juicier and more passionate, because when people actually do the fun activities and the exercises, that's what happens. And your relationship will benefit, and it will evolve the quality of conversation you're having on this topic. Embracing yourself for who you are, needs, desires, challenges, magnificence, and embracing your partner for who they are in all those same ways is a critical foundational piece to making polyamory work. That is true. And the only other thing that I would add to that is that it's evolving. It's not static. So don't think that we were monogamous and now we no longer are. You can revisit it whenever one of you feels like there's something new to discuss. All right. See you next week. Whole other topic. All right. Bye-bye.